What's up, everyone? Today we're back with another True Detective Season 1 episode deep dive, this time for episode 3, The Locked Room. If you've been following us since our episode 1 deep dive, hell yeah, we appreciate it. If you're new here, go watch our deep dives on the other episodes. We got links in the description. We ended episode 2 with the painting in the church, so let's get back to the case and see where Rust and Marty go next in their investigation.
In the opener, you already have the contrast between Rust and Marty that we touched upon last time out, because we can see on the looks of both of their faces that they're taking this in a completely different manner here.
The local fire department says that the church burned down 4 months earlier, but no fingerprints were found. The flyer that led Rust and Marty there was for a revival group called Friends of Christ. So they put out an APB for Friends of Christ, and they find a revival ministry in Franklin, Louisiana. They talk to Minister Terrio, who is running this current revival, and show him a picture of Dora, and although he doesn't remember her name, he does recognize her from when the revival was in Eunice. Apparently Dora showed up several times. Another woman working for the revival recognizes Dora and confirms this. They were in Eunice for about 6 months but left when the building caught fire, so the burned down church from episode 2 is where they were at for half a year. Terrio has been preaching for 20 years, with the last 8 being with Friends of Christ. He mentions that he came up under Billy Lee Tuttle and went to his college in Baton Rouge. Russ asks to see identification for all of the revival staff members, and he and Marty conduct some interviews. One of the girls, Tina, mentions that Dora pulled up to the revival one day with a tall man with scarred skin along his jaw. There is a dude named Bert who is working for Terrio. He spent 2 years in Angola for whacking off outside of a school. The dude is kind of a creep, but he's clearly mentally challenged. Rust is suspicious of Bert, but Terrio tells Rust to talk to Bert alone. When Rust emerges from his one-on-one with Bert, he's no longer suspicious. It turns out that Bert was castrated by some Bloods back in Angola. When Rust braced him, he shit himself. Since Dora Lang was raped, it most likely couldn't have been Bert. Rust rules out Terrio and his revival as suspects and wants to focus more on the tall man.
Shea Wiggum is one of those incredible HBO character actors. He's playing a revivalist tent preacher here, which gives way to the classic science versus religion debate for Marty and Russ that a lot of people reference.
Can you imagine if people didn't believe what things they'd get up to?
Exact same thing they do now.
Marty likes the idea of religion for providing some sort of cover and safety for humanity, where Rust wants to see the true intentions of who is really who. This checks out completely. One of our detectives has his share of secrets, and the other isn't afraid to bare himself to the world, sometimes far too much. Our resident cynic has his points, driving the lens toward Marty and the cruel world that he's grown to resent so much. In his previous trauma explains some of the resentment he holds toward the idea of a lasting happiness as a final destination. But shit, wouldn't the world simply go to hell if everybody knew how difficult that was going to be to obtain? Maybe Marty's overly simplistic worldview ain't so far off. Back to our case, we now have to determine whether or not the tall dude is a MacGuffin or a prime suspect. There's still something a little off about the whole situation. Just any connection to Tuttle in general puts a bad taste in your mouth. And the character of Bert gives way to the rundown, decrepit tinge that the directors and writers have put on this southern environment in general. His incident came as a result of having bad meds in his opinion, and there is also the fact that a guy like that should not be put in a place like Angola that we already know is an absolute hellhole because of what Marty has said about it. He's a product of a bad environment as well, and a bad system.
So Rust and Marty start canvassing all the hospitals and looking for any tall, scarred male sex offenders. There's this funny moment where Rust talks about one kid who did a lot of breaking and entering crimes, and he just had to jerk off and unleash a load before he left the house. Talk about adding insult to injury. This leads to interrogations where Rust takes the lead and just mentally breaks down every suspect, dismantles them piece by piece. There's this funny scene in 2012 where Rust is just flexing to Papania and Gilbo about his ability to figure out if someone is guilty or not.
I've never been in a room more than 10 minutes. I didn't know whether the guy did it or not. How long does it take you?
Rust's ability to read others is uncanny. The fact that he can tap into the same things he criticizes in order to manipulate as he picks and chooses is a bit concerning, however.
Got one way out, and it's through the grace of God. You are only as the Lord made you.
We like this guy, but that doesn't mean he's always a good guy. This is where an overly analytical, borderline psychotic persona can be a tremendous asset. This 2012 scene is ironic too, because it seems like Rust might be turning that same strategy onto these two in the interrogation room.
Now, insomnia is obviously a terrible thing to experience, but it does come with the benefit of being able to get more work done, and that's exactly what Russ Cole does. He puts his insomnia to work and starts burning the midnight oil, looking for evidence and patterns and whatever he can find to break the case open. He's pulling all-nighters to search through records on all dead bodies in the database.
This reminds me of watching The Last Dance and realizing how insane Jordan was, only instead of free throws and weightlifting, we're taking a look at obsessive case cracking. Marty may have been onto something here because it seems like he does have a hard time letting stuff go. We see that later on too when Rust passes on spending the night with his date because he's already married to the game, baby. Sorry, man's taken.
All this deep diving by Rust results in him finding an important clue. 3 years ago, there was a flood in Abbeville where they pulled a dead girl from the river. The death was ruled accidental, but Rust found lacerations on her stomach and she was positive for meth and LSD in her system. There's just no fucking way that she was killed by some branches and debris. Oh, and there's also a spiral tattoo on her back. Even Marty can't argue against that evidence. The girl is ID'd as Rianne Olivier. She was 22 when she died and she was from Pelican Island, which is a small town of 300. Her grandpa is still alive and does work catching crabs on the island. At this point, Major Quesada comes in and wants Rust and Marty to handle another case, but they convince him to give them 2 more days. So now Rust and Marty drive 2 hours to Pelican Island and talk to Rianne's grandpa. She left 4 years ago just like her mother. She had a boyfriend named Reggie Ledoux, who was an older boy from a shit family. The Ledoux family is still around, but much smaller now with only a cousin or 2 left. Rianne went to school at the Light of Way. Her dad is a merchant seaman, and her mom was last known to be in California. The grandpa does have a box of Rianne's stuff, which included her last yearbook from 10th grade.
The spiral strikes again. The interspersement, I think that's a word, of the religion on the airwaves preceding Rust shutting down Marty's polyamorous thoughts with some of the hardest lines of the century is perfect television.
World needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
Part of that quote is true though. These dudes are both bad, but also good. But also bad. But also good. They have a purpose that protects the common good, and that has to count for something, right? The scene shows us another depressing canvas of bayou living. Despair, failure, hurricanes, substances, crab fishing. You know how it is.
Wasn't surprised they found her like that. Everybody think they gonna be something they not. Everybody think they got this big plan.
So Rust then goes through Rianne's yearbook from Light Away. It's a small school that's part of Tuttle's foundation, the Wellsprings program. Our duo pulls up to the Light Away school, which has been shut down since 1992. Rust ends up talking to this rugged-looking man on a lawnmower. The man says Hurricane Andrew destroyed the school and they never reopened it. The man works for the local parish and covers several properties. He claims that he doesn't know anyone who's worked at the school or went to the school, and he's only been coming here for the last few months.
I swear HBO has an army of these character actors. As much as people are hellbent on telling us the Tuttles are good, it feels really strongly like they are not.
So while Rust is asking the man questions, Marty gets an update on Reggie Ledoux. So he honks the horn and gets Rust to cut his interview short. Ledoux skipped parole 8 months ago, was charged with statutory rape, but those charges were dropped. In '93, he was busted in connection with a narcotics lab that made meth and LSD. Remember, both Rianne and Dora had those drugs in their system when they died. Lastly, Ledoux spent 2 years in Avoyelles for his drug charge, and his cellmate during the last 4 months of his sentence was none other than Charlie Lang, Dora's ex-husband. All the pieces are coming together. Marty calls in an APB on Ledoux, and the search for the prime suspect is on.
We got a hit right before the buzzer. Moving away from the church angle, you can feel like the energy is building. We even have a bit of chemistry between the 2 detectives after an episode that was filled with some bickering in between. Sounds like some shit's about to go down if we're getting nom comparisons at the very least. And there's just something really unsettling about a guy walking around in tighty whities with a gas mask on.
Alright, so that pretty much does it for the investigation in this episode. Let's move on to Rust and Marty's personal lives in 1995, because there's a lot of shit here to discuss. In episode 2, we saw the first physical altercation between Rust and Marty, and we get way more of that in this episode. It starts when Rust happens to be at Marty's house when he isn't there. Oh, and to make matters worse, Rust cut Marty's grass, which really pisses Marty off.
I just don't ever want you mowing my lawn, all right? I like mowing my lawn.
Rust was returning the mower that he borrowed, and since Marty wasn't home, He just hung around the kitchen for a bit talking to Maggie. Maggie's talking about setting Rust up with a nurse or something like that.
Chen, when you talk about the tensions in this episode, the scene at that roadside joint comes to mind. Marty takes a dig at Rust for his habit of finding rabbit holes in his sobriety. Kind of a rough first couple punches. Rust still lands the bigger burn though.
People incapable of guilt usually do have a good time.
They've got more in common than meets the eye. Their bad habits and sharp personalities just manifest in different ways. Rust being arrogant and a bit wacky, while Marty can be a self-absorbed hothead who is on several occasions full of shit in his personal life. The funny thing is, they both agree on how to proceed. They make a good investigation team with the balance they bring each other.
We gotta touch on Marty's home life real quick. As we've mentioned before, he's becoming more and more withdrawn. We know he's cheating on Maggie, but it also seems like he's not paying much attention to his daughters. A side effect of this is that his oldest daughter, Audrey, is starting to exhibit some concerning behavior. She's drawing inappropriate pictures, and she's been asking Maggie why dad isn't around as much. Marty is using the case as an excuse, but Maggie sees right through it.
Marty digging real deep here to invoke the name of Wile E. Coyote to try and get some extra play with his wife. There's that strange exchange that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Chen, between Rust and Maggie that Marty does not seem super cool with. I mean, the symbolism of showing up to a guy's house who doesn't really appreciate his family to mow his lawn and rock a white tank top while conversing with a dude's wife about your progress healing from losing your wife and kids is not real subtle. The lawn becomes quite a metaphor here.
Speaking of scumbags, we gotta cover the double date scene and the stuff that happens afterwards because Marty completely loses his shit.
Did she suck your dick? Just for a little bit.
So Marty and Maggie set Rust up with a woman named Jennifer, and immediately she's like, damn, this Rust Cole guy is handsome, I'm into it. After all, Matthew McConaughey is the same dude who was the poster boy for romantic comedies in the early 2000s, so we get it, girl, we get it.
It's not a side effect.
So when something feels good, does that mean it feels twice as good?
This double date is a disaster for Marty though, since he sees Lisa, the girl he's been cheating on Maggie with, on a date with a younger man. Marty is getting jealous and possessive and is being outrageously obvious in a public setting. Dude fucking asked her to take a shot with him. What are you doing, man? Your wife is right there. Later on, he's drunk as fuck and just completely breaks into Lisa's spot and assaults the man she's with. Just completely out of control and illegal. We say Rust is crazy, but Marty the entire time is just out of his mind. Maggie is onto him, and at this point, all she needs is concrete proof that he's cheating. And in a lot of ways, she wants to keep the family and marriage together, so she's looking for reasons to turn a blind eye.
So much for that short-lived reconciliation, huh Marty? Rust is flexing the disinterested smart guy game to a T. Though he does seem miserable regardless, it seems like the girls are into it. You're right, Chen. Marty gets even lower than he did previously during this whole series of dysfunction, just after he gave a little bit of false hope to Maggie that he was going to come back to form here. It's interesting to see Marty lost in his own past when we look at the 2012 flashbacks when he thinks of Maggie, something we pointed out about Rust last time.
We do gotta briefly mention the middle finger count. Throughout the season, Rust and Marty love to flip each other off, and it first starts with Marty here, so let's start the middle finger count at 1. We also gotta touch on Rust's nihilistic views on life. His rant to Papania and Gilbo at the end of the episode is absolutely wild. Rust is obviously no serial killer, but it almost seems like he's understanding of the terror that is present in real life. He describes the deaths of the women from their perspective as relief from this cruel reality that is life.
Did Rust need a strong vent for his cynical nihilistic tendencies, or is he just wanting these two out of the room to get a look at whatever they have on that table? There's also the chance they wanted him to take this bait all along. And the sweet release of death that Rust preaches about is a bit much, though he is fairly consistent in that message, especially as it connects to his daughter.
All your life, not all your love, all your hate, all your memory, all your pain, it was all the same thing.
Ledoux's spot feels like it'll have something real sinister in the midst, given all the buildup we've seen.
Lastly, let's just touch on detectives Gilbo and Papania. Throughout their interview with Marty in 2012, these guys keep pushing the narrative that Cole is responsible for the murders all along. The fact that he wanted to keep the case out of the task force hands in 1995 is very telling to them. Marty obviously knows that Rust didn't do the murders, and he just laughs all of this shit off, but it's something to keep an eye on for the 2012 timeline. With that being said, we are done with our breakdown for episode 3. We will catch y'all later for episode 4. Thanks for watching.